Don't move, Silas Tremaine said, voice low enough to thread the dark without disturbing it. A red dot quivered on the stranger's sternum like a trembling heart laid on her shirt, a laser bead sneaking through the gap in his kitchen curtains. Silas didn't have to search for the shooter, the angle, and the height sang the geometry to him as clean as a bell. Third house down across the gulch, second-story dormer, someone with a good glass and worse intentions. He moved on instinct, his body remembering things long after his mind had sworn it would forget. He slid between the red and her chest, thumbed the breaker by the mudroom with a practiced palm, and pulled her to the tile as the house snapped to wild, forgiving black. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Silas felt the stranger's breath hitch under his forearm. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and cut cedar, of the pie he'd botched for his daughter and the kindling he'd split too thin. A coil of fear slithered at the base of his ribs, not for himself. Junie, he whispered without raising his head, feeling the name like a fragile lamp inside his chest. Upstairs, down the short hall, second door, the room with glow-in-the-dark stars he'd stuck to the ceiling, too many and too bright, because when she'd asked for a sky he'd tried to give her everything. The woman on his floor shifted, careful. He's still watching, she breathed, voice rasped like she'd been running on gravel. I saw him through your window before I knocked. Silas angled toward the sink, keeping his shoulders between her and the window. If he'd had a wish to spend on cowardice, he would have thrown it hard enough to break all the glass in the county. Instead, he lifted his phone with 2 fingers and slid it toward the braided rug like it was a live wire. No screens. No glow. The dark held them safer than any lock. His pulse mapped the room better than his eyes. Who are you? He asked, but the question had 100 smaller questions nested inside it. Are you bleeding? Are they close? Did you bring them here on purpose? And behind every small one stood the tallest. How do I keep my daughter asleep? Nadia Quinn, she said. He heard Tehran in the shape of the Q and Appalachia in the N, a voice picked up from different roads and stapled together to keep out the wind. He followed me up the service road. There were 2 at first. One peeled off at the fork where the creek cuts the gulch. What do they want? She laughed once, not a sound of humor. What everyone wants. To keep a secret alive long enough to bury it. Silas tasted the memory of coffee he hadn't had time to make. You bring a secret to my door, Miss Quinn. You wouldn't let me die on your porch, she said, like she'd studied him before she knocked. And your porch light's been out for weeks. You forgot you were visible. Silas hadn't forgotten. He'd hoped. Hope was just a poor man's plan dressed in Sunday clothes. He brushed his knuckles over the woman's shoulder, searching for wetness. His hand came back clean. The red dot had vanished when he threw the breaker. The shooter, if he was patient, would wait for a mistake. Most men were impatient when they thought they were in control. Silas counted on that more than on prayer. He eased to a knee, every tendon careful not to creak. We're going to stand on 3, he murmured. Walk, no silhouette. We'll keep the counter between us and the window with the gulch view. Stay in my shadow. Your daughter? Nadia asked. Sleeping, Silas said, because saying safe was tempting fate. He rose and she rose with him, her breath shallow, her heat a small sun at his side. They slid along the lower cabinets, their socks whispering to the tile, the refrigerator a cold mountain to break the line of sight. Silas's fingers knew the edge of the maple island like they knew a prayer's beads. He had planed the wood himself, bleached the knots of sap stain to pale fossils, run his palm back and forth until the grain hummed under skin. He had built this kitchen to give Junie a place where mornings could be ordinary. He'd never meant to teach it to hold a siege. They reached the interior wall by the pantry. Silas felt the room's dimensions flex around his understanding. The house was a big rectangle at the edge of a smaller world, forest, ravine, or ribbon of logging road that pretended to be a driveway. He'd bought it for the view. He loved it for the silence. Tonight, the silence was a sheet of ice and he had 2 people to skate across it without falling through. Your car, he asked. Ditched outside your gate, Nadia said. They know I'm here. Silas breathed once through his teeth. He pictured the gate, a pair of old ranch panels he'd borrowed from a neighbor who didn't need them, lashed to cedar posts and believed to be adequate because adequate had been enough for so long. He pictured the gulch, steep on his side, scrub on theirs, a line of sight that cut his living room like a surgical thread. He pictured the unlit porch, the shoe he'd left on the second step, the shovel he'd forgotten to lean back against the wall. Why him, he said, and when she didn't answer he said, why me? You have a reputation for minding your business until the moment you don't, Nadia said. I was told if I made it this far, you'd do what's right. Silas almost smiled, a flash of irony that felt like a cracked tooth. That depends who's writing the definition. A soft thud lifted from the porch. Not the clumsy weight of a boot. The feathered touch of fingertips finding purchase. Silas angled his head without moving his shoulders. The front door's deadbolt, a habit he treasured on most nights, had been thrown on this one. Things that kept you safe one day made you slow the next. Basement, he whispered. Stairs are behind the pantry. There's a bench under the first landing. Crouch there. No light, no phone. Don't sneeze unless you want to be a map. I can help. You're helping by staying alive. Go. He felt her hesitate. He didn't blame her, anywhere a man told you to hide felt like a place you should run from. But she slipped through the pantry door and down into the house's breathing dark. Silas waited 2 heartbeats. The thud came again, closer, curious. He imagined a gloved hand exploring the edge of the door, feeling for the measure between frame and jamb. He thought of the breath upstairs. Junie. He thought of the stars on her ceiling and the fact that he'd let her choose too many, because he didn't know how to give her less of anything she asked for. Silas moved without noise through a home that knew his weight. He lifted the fire iron from the slate by the hearth and set it on the counter to his left, a simple anchor to tell his hand where the edge of the world stopped. He slid a chair, slow, to place metal legs against wood with a murmur a man would miss if he hadn't learned to listen to houses as if they were bodies. He crouched by the interior wall and waited for a shadow to cross the seam of the door. The knock surprised him with its politeness. 3 soft taps that pretended to be rain. Then a voice, patient and dry, the kind of voice that wore leather gloves even when it was hot. Mr. Tremaine, it said. I believe you have something of ours. Silas glanced at the door as if it could answer back. If you mean the Good Housekeeping subscription, you're welcome to it. The voice didn't laugh. You've been out here 5 years. Long enough to know which noises belong to the woods and which don't. You know how many of us there are. You also know we could take your door in 10 seconds and your wall in 20. The question is whether we need to. He was right about one thing. Silas could hear 3 men on the porch, 2 weight shifts to the left of the threshold, 1 to the right. He could smell oil on a weapon that had been cleaned in a hurry and expensive soap used by a man who wanted to smell like he didn't work. He could taste creek silt, faint but recent, on the air they brought in with them because they didn't know how to step around a muddy place without gathering it up. You point a laser at somebody in my kitchen, Silas said, and then you want to negotiate? We're not here for you, the voice said. We're here for the woman who brought noise to your quiet. Open the door and step aside, and we make sure your quiet goes back to being quiet. You know her name? Names don't matter. Silas felt something old and sour rise from the bottom of him, something that remembered when his name hadn't mattered to a clipboard. That's the only thing that does, he said, surprising himself with the heat in it. A low chuckle through the wood. You're going to make this difficult. I am what the job requires, Silas said. A pause. The men jostled the porch boards soft as cats. We don't want to wake the child, the voice said, as if you were offering a kindness. Silas's hand flattened against the wall, palm hunting for the studs he'd memorized with nails and a hammer. Bone to bone with the house. You say her name, he said, very quiet, and you won't have a tongue to say anything else. Another pause. This one longer. Somewhere across the gulch, a night bird made a sound like a bent hinge. The voice sighed theatrically, the way men do when they want to show how reasonable they are. We'll give you a minute to think it over, Mr. Tremaine, he cooed. Decide if you're a father first or a neighbor first. The porch boards whispered again, feet backing off in that sideways way men learn to move when they don't like being shot. Silas breathed the house full again. He listened hard to the silence for the scrape of a body hugging glass, then harder for the sound of jeopardy. Theme music upstairs, Junie's nightlight radio was set to low, because routine had saved them both more than once. The quiet told him what he needed. They were regrouping. They wouldn't wait long. He slipped into the pantry and down the narrow stairs, feeling the chill of the concrete kiss his shins. Nadia crouched beneath the landing, knees tucked against her chest, the outline of her in the black like a sketched thought. They know about your daughter, she whispered. They want me nervous, Silas said. He crouched and put the weight of a hand on the wood above her. Are you hurt anywhere I can't see? No, Nadia said. Your porch, there's a camera. They spray-painted it. I only saw the laser when it hit the frost scars on your window film. Silas grunted, the smallest of gratitudes. He had put the film up in October because the heater had been greedy. The film had kept the heat in and, tonight, reflected a bullet well enough to say hello. What did you bring? Nadia reached into her jacket and pressed something small and rigid into his palm. It was lighter than a secret should be and more dangerous. MicroSD, 32 gig. You gonna tell me I'm crazy? She asked. Not tonight, he said. Tonight I think you're alive. She pressed fingers to her lips. I work for a company that builds things that save lives. That's the story. The truth is we build things that decide when a life isn't worth saving anymore. Her breath shivered and steeled. Field deployable targeting systems. The red dot on my chest? Proof of concept. No operator, just a sensor suite and an algorithm with a menu of permissions. The pilot project was supposed to be a wildfire spotting platform. They came to the ridge to test it instead. Not a laser pointer, Silas said softly. A prioritization. Civilian, she said. Female. Late 20s to mid-30s. Primary threat classification, messenger. She swallowed. The platform was supposed to tag heat signatures over tree lines to warn helattack crews. They tuned it to hunt. Silas turned the card between finger and thumb like an insect wing. And you stole it. I tried. I copied what I could and ran when couldn't wasn't good enough. She lifted her head, a scrape against the stairs underside. I don't want to die because I told the truth, Mr. Tremaine. I don't want you or your daughter to either. He'd been called a lot of things, Mr. Tremaine least often. He wasn't used to strangers handing him the honest word like a loaded plate. We'll move in 2 minutes, he said. You'll follow my daughter's steps exactly. I've made them small enough you can keep up. That's supposed to be funny? That's supposed to be directions. He tucked the card into the flat pocket sewn inside the waistband of his jeans for a wrench he didn't carry anymore. He closed his hand around the rail and felt the wood's familiar splinters. If I tell you to crawl, crawl. If I tell you to be a rock, be stone. Understood. He rose and Nadia rose with him, hunger in her posture, not for food. For a future. He didn't know if he could serve it to her, but he could buy them minutes to figure out how. Upstairs, the house had that lightless, delighted stillness of a fort built at 10 and held until midnight. Silas moved through it on the balls of his feet. He paused at the bottom of the stairs to Junie's room and listened. He would have stepped into fire and told it to behave if she'd coughed. Her breathing sang through the door, a tiny hush, a smaller hum, the sound he'd loved first and most in this living. He eased inside and knelt by the low bed where she curled like a comma in the middle of a sentence. Her hair had stuck itself to her cheek. He peeled it back gently, kissed her eyebrows, a ritual he'd never skip even if the world was coming apart. Hey, June bug, he whispered, and it wasn't for waking, it was for him. He set the small backpack he kept under her bed on the duvet. Socks, sweater, tiny flashlight he never let her use except to test it, earplugs in case the world got too loud, the book with the fox who learned brave, raisins. He slid the straps over her shoulders without waking her and picked her up like some precious, breakable future he'd been asked to smuggle through a checkpoint. She stirred. Dada. Shoo, he whispered, the softest consonant. Night walk. Her fingers found the spot on his neck where the skin had been thinned since the injury that changed the way seasons moved through him. She plugged her thumb there, grounding them both. Stars, she asked, voice full of half-dream. Better, Silas said, because lying is sometimes a father's grace. We're going to count owls. He turned at the threshold. Nadia stood just outside the door, her face a pale idea in the dark, hands tucked beneath her armpits to keep in the heat and keep out her tremble. Silas nodded toward the hall, and they moved. They took the back stairs to the mudroom, put boots on with the silence that comes of practice and fear, and eased through the door he'd built from reclaimed barnwood because he liked the feel of a past that had done its time and earned its place in a present. The air out there tasted like iron and pine. The cold picked up his breath and shook it. The night had gone freckled with stars he couldn't afford to look at. He tucked Junie under his jacket like an extra rib. He led them away from the driveway, away from the line of sight across the gulch, away from the things that were direct and therefore fatal. He took the path he and Junie called the rabbit run, narrow trail cut lower than obvious, swapping clearings for thickets, staying too close to brambles to be comfortable and exactly close enough to be safe. Behind them the porch boards spoke again. A body-shifting weight, then more weight. Nadia flinched, Silas felt it through the air like a wire pulled tight. No, he murmured, the word a hand between her shoulders, guiding. Right foot heel to arch, match my step. She matched him. The human brain is an extraordinary machine when it wants to live. He counted 5 seconds, then 10, then a full 20 before the first raised voice cut the night. Doors clear, the leather glove voice called, cheerful as a weather report. No movement in the front rooms. Light the gulch, I want the slope. A blade of light cut across the ravine, high power, too bright, too convinced of its own usefulness. It clawed at trunks and pecked at leaves and did what men always do when they're scared, made more light. Silas stepped deeper into the dark. He felt the earth under his boots not as dirt but as something alive and opinionated about how you stepped on it. He felt the night like a partner who hadn't decided whether to trust him. They slid behind a fallen stump as old as a county line and listened while the men tried to make a small wild place behave. The night absorbed their commands and gave back mockery. Thermals, someone asked. Negative, someone else said, which meant they didn't have enough budget or enough time to deploy the good toys, or they had them and hadn't figured out how to tell the difference between a man holding his breath and a raccoon deciding if it wanted to ruin everybody's garden. Nadia leaned close enough for him to feel the tremor of adrenaline in her jaw. You carry, she whispered, not accusation, inventory. Not unless I have to, Silas said, and in this moment he didn't, because noise kills more than bullets do. He set his palm to the stump's moss, an old agreement, and let his body calibrate. 50 yards to the gully, he said. Beyond that, the creek. We use the water. They'll see the entry. They'll see the entry, he agreed, because you can't lie to reality and have it believe you. And the exit. What matters is how long the water keeps our scent. Long enough? Long enough is a story I'm telling myself, he said. We'll make it true. Junie squirmed. Silas shifted her more snugly. She pressed her face into his chest and made a sound he knew from fevers and storms. Okay, Bug, he murmured, this is the part where we pretend to be stones. Stones don't wiggle. Her body, offending gravity at the edges, tried to become geology. Children are better at magic than adults. They moved. He led with his knees, keeping his shoulders sloped, keeping Nadia tucked into his wake. The ground tilted toward the creek and brought them with it, dampness lifting the earth's breath toward their noses. The sound of water grew out of black like something someone had been saving for them. The stream was winter-thin, cold with snowmelt still pretending it could surprise spring. He stepped into it and felt the shock bite bone. He exhaled slowly and let the cold climb him until his body stopped arguing. He lowered Junie so her boots kissed the water and then picked her right back up because even stories have limits. He guided Nadia to find the flat stones that didn't wobble and the angle where the current wanted to help instead of fight. He entered at a broad bend where he knew silt liked to spiral and exited 2 turns later where he knew cattails pretended to be a hedge. Behind them, men discovered his kitchen and the pie he'd ruined, and they discussed ordinary things in extraordinary tones, because fear makes you small. The creek carried their voices away and delivered frogs instead. The frogs sang like the world believed in spring even if people were confused about it. At the old culvert, broken by a flood that had misunderstood boundaries, Silas knelt in the shadow and eased Junie to the moss. "Rest," he breathed. 1 minute. He would count rocks if he had to trick himself into it. He looked at Nadia. She was watching him with the focus of someone in triage. "You were military," she said, not a question. "I was a medic," he answered, which was true enough to live on. "Then search and rescue. Then a father. The last one's the only job that doesn't end." Her mouth did something like a smile without the luxury of it. "My father taught me never to confuse weapons with solutions," she said. "I built software and told myself it would make decisions in cliffs and smoke that humans couldn't. Then I watched it decide me." She looked at her hands like they'd done the crime. "It was never supposed to be a weapon." "Everything is if the problem is people," Silas said softly. They moved again, because rest is the strongest drug and you can overdose on it in a minute. He cut them through the cedar break behind the culvert and into a fold of ground that didn't exist to anyone who hadn't gotten lost there as a boy. He had, once. He'd promised the place he would come back if he ever needed to hide a king or a child. It took both, tonight. The fold delivered them to the foot of the old fire road, a scar of gravel and good intentions that climbed the ridge to a watchtower that hadn't watched since the county decided money was better spent on things that could be photographed for campaigns. The tower had a radio that sometimes liked company and sometimes didn't, depending on whether the wind had remembered how to align its molecules. "The tower," Nadia said, seeing what he was thinking. "Signal? If the generator remembers its manners, we can throw a call," Silas said. "If it doesn't, we can climb high enough to give a phone a chance." He shifted Junie so his arm didn't forget its blood. "Helicopters launch at first light if they're asked nicely," he added. "The men in your kitchen came because a helicopter launched without being asked nicely," Nadia said. "Then we'll ask louder." The fire road had a grade that pretended to be generous only because it wanted to kill you slower. They leaned into it and let it measure their lungs. Silas regretted how often he'd promised himself he'd run it more. Promises delay regret, they don't erase it. He counted 5 fences of breath: inhale, exhale, stake post, inhale, exhale, wire, because counting is a leash you can hang on panic. He adjusted steps to keep Nadia in his draft and Junie's legs from taking the weight of the slope. Somewhere behind, a truck engine grumbled to life. The boys had found his driveway and convinced themselves it was a road wide enough for their toys. Silas could see the next hour lay itself like a map. They'd take the bend too fast, bottom out at the wash, curse and accuse, then send 2 on foot to make sure the woods were what they looked like. Men who trusted machines forgot to trust angles. Nadia looked back. "They'll catch us on the road," she said. Silas shook his head. "They'll think like men who've only seen this place in daylight." He swung off the road at the downed alder that marked where the deer refused to use the county's ideas and instead followed the mountains. He slipped into the track the deer had made and the man had memorized, and the girl would learn if the future did them the favor of existing. The trail carried them along the ridge's hip, away from the road's silhouette and into a terrain that asked people who they were. Junie made a small complaint. He answered it with a kiss to her hair and a story he invented as he spoke. "There once was a rabbit who wore boots," he murmured. "Too big for her." But she kept stomping until they listened. "Boots don't listen," Junie mumbled into his chest. "These did," Silas said gravely. "They were very polite." Nadia snorted a laugh that sounded like it might injure her ribs. "You're good at this," she whispered. "I'm good at pretending the world is softer than it is," he said. It helps until it doesn't. They crossed a saddle where wind bragged about knowing the names of faraway storms. Silas tasted snow iron in it. The sky was a book he couldn't read without light. He consulted the smell of the dirt instead, the art of it, damp on top, dry 2 inches down, good for keeping the memory of feet. He hoped the men liked tires enough to ignore soil. Halfway to the tower, a drone rose from the gulch like a mosquito grown arrogant. It came high and lazy, red status blink winking to itself, propellers fussing. Nadia froze. Silas put a hand on her shoulder and pressed her until she remembered that spines bend or break. The drone cruised the ridge edge, tasting air. It didn't have a thermal pack, the whisper of its props told him budget again. But it had a camera and a man holding a tablet who wanted to believe he was God. He'll look at the road first, Silas breathed. Roads make men honest about their laziness. And if he doesn't? Then we stop being animals and start being plants, Silas said. Plants don't react. They let the world pass through them. He became cedar. Nadia tried oak and settled for willow. Junie, being a child and therefore better at transformation, became moss. The drone moved on. 15 seconds later a coyote yipped lower down and the drone, being a machine, looked for the coyote because its operator wanted a break from wanting them. They made the tower in a hurting silence. It stood above the ridge like a teacher who had waited years for someone to admit they didn't understand the lesson and finally gotten their wish. The stairs went up forever in a square that made your calves remember you were mortal. Silas took them in a rhythm he'd learned by carrying 112 pounds of stranger down stairwells that smelled like grief. He mourned his every regret and made himself a device for hauling. At the landing below the cab, he set Junie on a step and put a hand on the wall to borrow strength she'd left behind in summers when she had all of it. 2 minutes, he told Nadia, swallowing the apology he wanted to give her for a life that had made this necessary. No, she said. We don't have to. She pointed with her chin toward the east, where a line of lights moved the way men move when they want to make a point about ownership. Headlamps. Too many. Coming fast. Silas pressed his forehead to the cold metal rail and then climbed the last flight. The cab door had a lock that would keep out the honest and a handle that would welcome the competent. He lacked a key and had competence to spare. He showed the handle the trick of its own design and persuaded the door to remember it liked being open. The room smelled of dust and storms. The radio sat on the desk like a lonely shoulder needing a hand. He found the generator choke in the dark, pulled once, and the engine coughed like an old man being told the country was still worth it. The radio blinked to life, green as a roadside pharmacy sign. He pressed the transmit like a man pressing a bandage. County Dispatch, this is Fire Lookout 7. Requesting immediate law enforcement and medical response to grid, he rattled off numbers his brain had tattooed a long time ago. Multiple hostile actors on private property. Potential use of weaponized aerial platform. Civilian child on scene. Over. Static, then a voice he didn't know. Lookout 7, confirm identity. Silas Tremaine. Former SAR. You've got my search somewhere under things the county stopped funding. A pause like paperwork flipping. Copy, Tremaine. Units are en route. Air support available at first light. ETA ground units 60 minutes if the creek crossing cooperates. They'll cut the bridge, he said. Send the ones who know the deer crossings. We'll send everyone we have, the voice said, which wasn't the same thing. Do me a kindness and tell whoever's flying at dawn not to trust a friendly ping, he added. Not all the birds will be ours. Say again? They've got hardware pretending to belong. A beat, then, copy. The radio exhaled, a tired creature that had known too many emergencies and not enough budgets. Silas wanted to hug it. He settled for turning the volume just high enough to hear if the sky changed its mind. Headlamps reached the saddle below the tower. One beam broke away and began to climb the deer track nobody should have known. Nadia stiffened beside him. How? Men who have time study maps, Silas said. Men who have money by the men who studied. He swung the cab lights off and wrapped the room in absence again. He put a finger to his lips for Junie and she nodded with the solemnity of a general. He checked the door, then the windows, then the places a hand could come through if it didn't like asking. He found the coil of rope he'd left in a summer when he'd believed rope was for hauling picnic baskets to the shade. He found the flare kit in the first aid box and the cheap pair of binoculars that lied about their competence. On the stairs below, another beam of light moved the way a man moves when he thinks he's surprising his own shadow. Silas let his brain show him a picture, the leather-glove voice, smiling at the cab door because he loved doors. He stood in the center of the room and felt the tower press its thin steel against the night as if to say, I am also trying. Can they burn us out? Nadia whispered. Not without lighting half the county and explaining that to a judge in the morning, Silas murmured. Their budget doesn't include good excuses for arson. What about bad ones? That's what we're here to prevent. He heard the stair beneath the landing sigh under a body. He felt the tower vibrate through his boots. He was an ear, a palm, a man who had once learned to hear the difference between a wall that wanted to keep secrets and a wall that was ready to tell the truth. A fist rapped the door, casual as a neighbor with soup. Mr. Tremaine, the glove voice sang. Arguing with the radio is beneath you. Silas said nothing. Words were air and he was saving air for people who needed it more than displays of wit. He put his hand on Junie's head and left it there, gathering the small mule-stubborn courage she grew in her sleep. Tell you what, the voice went on. I have a plane leaving at 6. You give me the woman and whatever she took, and you and the kid get to keep your mornings. Otherwise, this ridge gets very educational. Nadia made a sound like the hinge bird. Silas squeezed her arm once. The plan that found him in that moment wasn't brave or complicated or even particularly smart. It was simply the one that made the best use of the only two things he had, the shape of the ground and the fact that men who love machines hate being made to feel foolish. He found the old rescue harness in the cabinet and buckled Nadia into it while she shook and cursed and tried not to cry. I thought you didn't carry, she hissed, as if she'd found betrayal in buckles. I carry what carries, he said. You're going to be a basket. What? Don't argue. Trust the idiot plan. He tied a line through the carabiner and looped it over the main crossbeam. He added a second line because he had learned, with blood, not to call a thing secure until redundancy had sworn to it. He looked into Nadia's face, pale even in the dark. You're going to step out that window and be a flag, he said. You'll swing under the platform and tuck into the north side where the braces make a pocket. You won't make a sound. You'll be colder than you knew was possible. You won't fall because I don't let people fall. The stairs, she began. The stairs are a funnel into a gun, he said. Under the platform is a conversation with gravity I can control. She stared at him like the world had offered her a bad joke and he was the punch line. Then she nodded once, wildly. The card? Safe, he said. Don't worry about what you can't carry with your hands. He popped the window latch and the tower let the outside in with a sigh that felt almost human. The night leaned its cold mouth against the room. He held the harness line and watched Nadia step onto the very small promise he'd made. She disappeared beneath the platform with a clank he wanted back and a breath he wanted to return to her lungs. On the stairs below, the men conferred in whispers that wanted to be seen as professionalism. Silas collected Junie. This is the part with the boots again, he told her. They're going to be very polite about climbing. She pressed her forehead to his chin. I can be quiet, she said, voice sleepy serious. I know, he murmured. He tucked her into the corner behind the desk and gave her the earplugs like a ceremony. Put the stars in your ears, he said. She did, hands small and sure. The door handle turned. The lock gave the argument it had and then lost. The door swung inward with a courteous creak. The glove voice entered first, because of course he did. He wore competence like a jacket tailored for him. Two more followed, one with a long gun, one with eyes that measured rooms like they were taking tables. The leader smiled when he saw Silas standing in the middle of the cab like a man who had mistaken himself for a lighthouse. There you are, the voice said. Up close, he had a face the world loved to trust, square, but not cartoonishly so, eyes the color of good denim, hair that said he used the expensive barber in the cheap town and tipped as if that could buy him morality. We lost your friend outside. She'll get cold without a coat. Silas didn't look at the window. He let his gaze sit on the leader's shoulder, just off-center, so the man would turn to find the thing Silas was pretending to see. People are angels of reflex, their bodies hate blank spaces. The leader twitched, the long gun twitched with him. Silas's hand, already at his thigh, found the flare pen. Don't, the man with the long gun said, which is the same as saying do, if the man you're saying it to has been told not to all his life and learned the difference between rebellion and necessity. Silas popped the cap and fired the flare past the leader's ear out the open window. It screamed into the night like a comet with opinions. The room turned red. The world turned startled. The men did what men do when light behaves in ways they didn't choreograph. They blinked and reached for the script they'd left in another coat. Silas took the leader's wrist in both hands, stepped sideways, and showed the leader the floor like he was offering him a new perspective. Junie made a small sound that died inside her earplugs. The man with the long gun swung it, found nothing he liked, and fired anyway because empty thunder makes some men feel tall. The bullet went through the radio and sang a note of grief that would have broken Silas's heart if he'd had time to let it. The second man lunged for the window, saw the flare carve the night, decided too late he didn't like it, and tripped over the coil of rope that had waited all these summers for its moment to smash shins. Silas took the long gun man by the belt and the back of the neck and redistributed him to the other side of the room, where a filing cabinet had an opinion about skulls. The leader rolled to a knee, very tidy even in humiliation, and came up with a knife that wanted to have a legacy. Silas saw the blade and felt his body reel backward through years to other rooms where metal had had ideas. He stepped forward against the feeling, because forward is where his daughter was. The leader smiled again, a man who enjoyed writing the endings of other people's stories. You can't keep this up forever, he said, making the word forever sound like a brand only he had the right to stamp. I don't need forever, Silas said, stealing breath from tomorrow. I need dawn. As if the world loved drama as much as men do, wind changed and brought with it the thump of rotors very far away. It was faint enough to masquerade as hope or dread depending on your diet. The leader heard it. His smile tilted. You don't get to decide whose bird that is, he said, almost kindly. Outside, the flare died in a hiss a poet might have plagiarized. Beneath the platform, Nadia hung in emptiness, teeth cutting her lip, blood tasting like Penny's indecisions. She tucked her knees as he'd told her and became smaller than fear. The long gun man groaned in the corner. The second man cursed at the rope like it had betrayed him. The leader lifted the knife again, impatient now. Silas reached without looking and found the second flare. He raised it and the leader shook his head, an adult chiding a teenager for thinking fireworks cured grief. You're outnumbered in a small room, the leader said. Put it down in. The tower shuddered. Not with weight on stairs, not with men stamping boredom into metal, but with the sky opening near enough to matter. The rotors were a heartbeat now. A spotlight cut the trees 50 yards off like an accusation. The leader didn't look away this time. He grinned like a man who had ordered consequences and had them delivered ahead of schedule. Silas's phone buzzed against his hip with a text from a number that had been quiet a long time. Orrin, bird inbound. Not ours. He didn't let the words show on his face. He didn't have to. The leader's eyes told him the same thing. Junie, star-stopped, looked up at him with a question her mouth didn't ask. He met her eyes and gave her the smallest nod, as if he could sell calm to a child who understood money. The helicopter banked and lit the tower in white that tried to be mercy and failed. A loudspeaker cracked the night into cubes. A voice, distorted by blade and arrogance, boomed, Tremaine. Step away from the window. Surrender the woman. Silas lifted the flare, the only star he controlled, and the room went red again. The leader lunged. The tower moaned like an animal about to decide whether it wanted to keep standing. The rope under Nadia's hands burned like a conversation with fire. The helicopter's skids kissed air just beyond the platform. A shape leaned out, black on white. A line dropped, metal clacking, teeth in its geometry. The loudspeaker voice said something else, but the blade stole the meaning. Silas drew a breath that could have been his last lesson to his lungs in. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. And Silas didn't finish the breath he'd started. He spent it. He threw the second flare at the floorboards, palm down like he was snuffing a snake. It popped and spat light so hot it turned the dust into visible ghosts. The leader flinched, not fear, calculation. Long Gun Man swore with his whole life, and the second man did what rookies do, he reached for the wrong thing. Silas didn't reach for anything. He moved. He stepped in, turned, and let the leader's wrist decide to meet the desk with velocity. The knife left that confident hand and clacked under a cabinet that had held field maps and now held something like luck. The flare howled red behind them. Wind from the rotor wash pressed the curtains flat to the screen and then sucked them outward like lungs reversing. Junie, he breathed, not to call, just to tell the universe which word he would die on if he had to. She was in the corner, small as a prayer, earplugs planted, watching his eyes the way a sailor watches a sky. The leader drove his shoulder into Silas's ribs. Silas accepted it, turned it, fed it to the wall. The man bounced. He was good at bouncing. He came up smiling again, insulted that gravity had been rude. The Long Gun Man shouldered his rifle and saw, through adrenaline and training, a line from barrel to child. He corrected, but correction is a confession. Silas was already there, already lifting the barrel's mouth toward the ceiling while his other hand tapped the trigger guard in a scold a teacher might envy. The bullet cracked, the radio died, and somewhere far away coyotes filed a complaint about noise ordinances. Enough, the leader said, and you could hear in the way he shaped the F how his entire life had persuaded doors without having to knock. This is over. Not for me, Silas said, and stepped backward the way you step out of a photograph, keeping the edges honest. His heel found the rope. His fingers found the belay. He hooked it into the backup as if he were sewing a stitch he'd ripped years ago and had always meant to mend. Come on, he whispered to his own body, the old machine. Remember. He slid. The harness bit his hips, a rough sincerity. Cold air slapped his face. Steel beams rushed up, then down, then up again as he pendulumed under the platform, feeling the tower's architecture with his shins. Nadia was a shadow tucked into the north pocket exactly where he'd told her to be, arms locked around the crossbrace so hard her tendons sang. Her teeth had found her lip and were writing a letter on it in blood. Take her, he said, voice so low it was practically a thought. He nudged Junie into Nadia's arms the way you pass a live coal to someone who can't drop it. Nadia received the child like a vow. She wrapped her body around Junie in the steel and whispered something Silas couldn't hear but believed in anyway. Above them, boots hammered metal. The leader shouted orders into the wind like a man suing the weather. The helicopter slid to the tower's shoulder, spotlight slashing the platform. The flare, in its brief, furious life, had painted everything hell. Now it guttered, screaming thinly as it died. Darkness returned in patches, holes in a curtain. The rotor thump had a tempo Silas could count. He matched it. He used the beats where light blinked to move like a muscle memory people don't know they have. He swung out, fed the rope, found the column, hugged it, became one more piece of this steel animal pretending to be a tree. His hands burned. He didn't ask them to stop. He slid until boot met rung, then dropped the last distance to the diagonal knee brace, knees flexed to pay the price with interest instead of principle. Down, he breathed toward Nadia. We go down and north. She nodded against the metal. Junie's fingers lifted and found his sleeve in the dark like they had a map of him tattooed on their skin. He kissed them without breaking motion. Then they were moving again, a slow spidering descent along the outside of a thing designed to be climbed from within. Tower, someone above barked. The word had too much authority for how little sense it made this far from city glass. A muzzle flashed once. The round chewed sheet metal inches from Silas's shoulder and screamed away into the trees. The helicopter backed off, rotors rising, then nosed back in with intent. The loudspeaker cracked. Tremaine. This asset is now under federal contract. Stand down. Which federal? Which contract? Which law? Silas filed the questions in the drawer where he kept fire and waited. He didn't have time to be mad at men who borrowed words that belonged to people who paid taxes. He dropped the last brace to dirt and felt the ground with his heels the way you decide if a horse is going to kick. The ground decided to hold him tonight. He pulled the belay, and the rope came away with a hiss and a leap. He coiled it fast, muscle memory from a life where coils saved minutes and minutes saved bodies. Nadia landed beside him. Junie clung. He tucked them both against the tower's north leg, where the wind tore the helicopter's voice to ribbons. The beam scythed past, too bright to see through, which is the problem with searchlights and men who like them, they blind the holder first. Foot trail, Silas said, lips to Nadia's ear. 30 paces west, then a cut down. What if they're there? Then we use the other one they don't know exists. You have 2 of everything, she said, not a compliment, a diagnosis. Ever since I had 1 of her, he answered, and moved. They flowed along the tower's shadow until it ran out, then became smaller than their fear. The beam combed the ridge and kept failing the test in the same way men always did when they mistook light for knowledge. Silas felt the trailhead with his ankles and cut into it at an angle no deer would have tolerated and no map would admit. He counted the paces that weren't paces, because counting was the bridge from panic to plan. Behind them, boot noise met metal. The stairs ate men with more pride than seasoning. North side, the leather-gloved voice shouted, louder now, closer, angry that a tower built with county optimism had suddenly become a teacher of humility. They're on the steel. Not anymore. Silas let the trail pitch them down into scrub. The world social distanced their heat, cedar took their outlines into itself. He put Junie's ear against his throat so the thump might be a lullaby if not a lie. He used his free hand to keep Nadia low, 2 fingers between shoulder blades, a steering wheel made of trust. A new sound spoke out of the trees to the south, the mosquito whine of rotors too small to carry men and too loud to be ignored. Drone. Its blink found the tower, flirted with it, then veered, curious and cruel, toward the line of darker dark where people thought bushes made them invisible. Nadia froze. Silas put his palm on her spine and pressed her further down until the ground made acquaintances with her cheek. Don't move, he breathed. He felt her muscles chew stone by force. The drone's camera lied to its operator about what it could see. It always did. It looked, it decided, it drew red boxes around myths. The red dot in part 1 had been a laser sneaking through a window. This, a little cousin, painted bark 10 feet off and called itself successful in a database a continent away. The operator, arrogant and bored, banked left after a coyote because coyotes are easier than fathers. Silas exhaled. He let the air leave on the word thank you without giving the word the disrespect of sound. Then he crawled. Not like a man who'd crawled under gunfire on other continents. Like a man moving a sleeping child to a car seat at midnight without waking her. The woods respected that. The trail split at the cut where he and Junie used to play at Explorers on weekends that had been regular before tonight. He took the left that pretended to go to a view and then didn't, and then the right that pretended not to exist and did too much. It brought them to the creek drop, a narrow, steep slide of soil held together by roots and rumors. He went first, then turned and caught Nadia's arm and turned it into a controlled fall. He didn't mention the stone at the bottom he had once cracked a shin on. He adjusted their angle so the stone couldn't recognize them by the shape of another bruise. They reached water and the cold made itself a god for a second time. Junie made a sound he had never heard her make. He put his cheek to hers. I know, he said, which was both empathy and apology. It will be over in 4 minutes. How do you know? Nadia asked, teeth clacking so loud he wanted to shush weather. Because I know how long a bad thing is allowed to be true in my house, he said, and waded into the current. They took the bend where Silt ate footsteps, then the undercut bank where raccoons wrote gossip, then the culvert's broken mouth again. Inside, he said. What if there's a snake? Nadia breathed. Then we apologize to it and go faster. He slid on his side into the concrete throat and pulled them after, one at a time, smooth as a seamstress. The pipe belly had graffiti from teenagers who had needed a place to believe they were huge. Tonight the letters became barcodes, and the night scanned them and decided they were good people. He belly crawled, chin down, dragging Junie in a frictionless tuck, Nadia inches behind. The helicopter thunder tilted, shifted, moved away, then back, then away again, search patterns drawn by men who had rehearsed for someone else's ridgeline. The drone buzzed big and mean outside, looking for heat with a camera that resented cold. Silas counted handholds, they counted too, agreeing to a treaty with concrete. He came out the far side into a ditch that had been an irrigation dream during an administration he no longer remembered voting for. He rose to a crouch and peered over the ditch's lip. The ridge shoulder lay ahead in gray suggestion. The east was lifting a worn coin toward value. Dawn was coming. And helicopters with it. He checked his phone and winced at the treason of the glow. One text waited like a hand on a door, Oren, on station low. County Bird 5 out. Hold your ground. Don't trust uniforms without unit numbers I send. A second bubble arrived before he could reply, ping spoof confirmed. They're painting you friendly to everyone who didn't do their homework. Ping spoof. Friendly transponder identity stolen. The corporate bird would read as a county asset to anyone who wanted easy answers at sunrise. He loved machines the way he loved fire, what they could cook, what they could ruin. He typed with his thumb, angles tight. N, with me. Child with us. Tower compromised. I have card. This will get stupid. 3 dots, then, already stupid. Light in 14. I'll bring the loud truth. Make them choose in front of witnesses. Witnesses. The ridge didn't count in courts. Bodies in uniforms did. Body cams did. Air-to-ground video did if it wasn't edited by someone who had dinner plans. Silas tucked the phone back into his pocket and let the electronics go dark like a deer in November. Friend? Nadia whispered. Someone who taught me I didn't know enough, he said, which was the most honest definition of friend he had. They took the ditch north until it turned into nothing and then kept going. The brush gave way to a slope of scree that slid under your boots. How a crowd moves when the alarm goes off in a store and nobody believes it's their problem. Silas put Junie on his back and used both hands. Nadia used both hands in her mouth to curse physics. He appreciated how the cursing gave her back control. The ridge saddle came up like a lazy hallway. He stopped, looked, listened in the old order of survival. The windsock on the tower, old, tattered, officious, pointed southeast. Sound came from west. The corporate bird was circling to make a show above a crowd it hadn't yet gathered. The county bird would come low, treetops, the pilot cussing, Oren laughing into the mic because laughter is a weapon if you know how to aim it. A voice rose from below and right. Tremaine. Not loudspeaker this time, lungs, angry ones. The leather-gloved man stood where the deer trail met the saddle, breath making steam, eyes making measurements. 2 of his men flanked, lower, guns low, the way smart men carry guns when the news might watch later. Nadia pressed against Silas's back without asking. Junie's fingers hooked his collar like fishhooks made of trust. He felt the weight of their belief and let it settle into the hollow in his sternum where other things had lived and died. I'm bored, the leader called, and you could tell he hated being the only person who could hear his own performance. Give me the problem and I'll give you the day back. Nadia stiffened. Silas put a hand out behind him until it met her hip, a touch that meant stand. It also meant I know what you heard and you don't have to be that brave yet. He stepped into view. He kept his palms open, empty, the universal language for a man not looking to escalate. His shoulders squared themselves without consulting him. Muscle memory is a democracy of one. That loudspeaker line about contracts, he said, conversational, stalling, engineering. You sure you want to keep using words you can't spell if a prosecutor asks? The leader smiled like a good school picture. You don't strike me as the litigious type. I'm the don't shoot me type, Silas said. And the don't take my daughter's mourning type. Then don't make me. I don't make men like you do anything, Silas answered. You turn your own gears. The leader sighed theatrically. He gestured with 2 fingers. One of his men lifted a hand unit. The drone, obliging and eager, swerved from the ridge and came toward the saddle like a dog with too much training and not enough conscience. Its red status blink winked. Its camera adjusted and hunted. It found movement and put a red bead on Nadia's shoulder from 50 yards away because physics and greed make poor parents. Silas's mouth formed the words before his brain could nominate alternatives. Don't move, he said. The bead stuck, quivered, stuck. The algorithm wanted motion. It had been tuned by men who feared running messengers, not mothers turned to trees. He stepped between the red and the target, casual as a man noticing weather. The bead moved to his chest because math works quicker than courage. He felt fear punch him like an old acquaintance delivering news, not today, but soon. Ah, the leader said, amused. The chivalry angle. The geometry angle, Silas corrected. He tilted his chest until the dot slid to his sternum. He felt its small heat, maybe imagined. He thought about what sensors saw and how little of a life fit in that view. The helicopter came over the ridge like a promise kept by a liar. It bore the county's colors on its belly transmitter and someone else's intent in its doors. The spotlight scorched the saddle. The loudspeaker made a sentence feel like a baton, Tremaine. Hands visible. Surrender the woman. The child is not a target. There was a world of confession in that last clause. Silas lifted his hands higher. Nadia didn't move. Junie breathed into his shoulder like a tiny factory making oxygen the slow way. The leader waited, knife absent, gun absent, confidence present. He loved physics because he thought it always did what he wanted. Another rotor beat answered from the west. Lower. Dirtier. A voice on a second loudspeaker that sounded like it had smoked and sworn its way through hard seasons cracked the dawn, County Air 2 on scene. Tremaine, hold position. All ground units, confirm badge IDs to command on TAC 3. Any bird telling you different is not mine. Oren. The leader's eyes narrowed their friendliness. Busy Ridge, he said. Crowded when the truth shows up, Silas replied. The second helicopter came in low enough to scare Pinecones out of residence. It was smaller, older, and more honest about its airworthiness. A man leaned out the open door, harnessed and casual, bald head shining like Scrimshaw in the early light. He held a loud hailer like it was a shared joke. Silas, he called, laughter in the name even now. You always did date chaos. Try marriage, Silas yelled back by cupping his hands, because the tower's radio lay dead and his phone would make him glow. 2 guests. 1 small. I see her, Oren replied, voice softening on the last word. You doing that thing where you pretend you're not terrified? Currently, Silas said. Cool. Keep doing it, Oren said, then changed tones and addressed the ridge. All right, heroes. We're recording from 3 angles and the ground is waking up with cameras. If anybody's carrying a badge that doesn't come with a pension, now's the time to go home. The corporate helicopter adjusted its posture, irritated by a voice that refused to be eaten by rotors. The leader tapped his ear, as if listening to a man he didn't consider his equal, and then smiled again, which made Silas want to take him by the shirt and introduce him to gravity. Mr. Tremaine, the leader said. Last offer. The messenger in her message. You walk your child back down to breakfast. Silas shook his head. She already ate fear. I'm not serving seconds. Then let's educate you. The leader flicked 2 fingers. The drone zipped closer and stabilized. The bead tightened on Silas's chest as if trying to decide where stories end. Silas lifted his right hand slowly. The leader's men tensed. He didn't reach for a pocket. He held up a mirror no bigger than his palm, the old signal mirror from the tower's emergency kit that he had grabbed without knowing why a minute earlier. He tilted it once, twice, patient as a man teaching light to behave. The beam caught the mirror's surface and hopped. It slid to the leader's coat as if it had always wanted to go there. Silence has flavors. This one tasted like pride becoming caution. The leader glanced down at his own sternum where the red dot sat like a malignant Christmas decoration. He chuckled, low. Clever, he said. He didn't step left or right. He didn't sweat the light. He ignored it, which was a thing men like him had practiced since birth. Camera on that? Oren barked from the air. We got the dot on the suit? Affirm, a second voice replied over the rotor noise from Oren's bird, and you could hear a camera operator smiling grimly at the evidence falling into his lens. Great, Oren said cheerfully. Love props. His voice shifted again, professional and tired. Ground units, you've got an air asset misreporting its identity. County ID's dispatch will read it friendly. It is not. Repeat, it is not. Back off. Keep your rifles down and your phones up. Phones came up. They always did. Men who wanted to do wrong had to run faster now. The corporate pilot must have decided he disliked the audience. The helicopter banked, rose, backed off in a circle that promised to return with a better excuse. Not over, the leader said, reading the same omen. You think one sunrise ends the night? No, Silas said. I think it just turns lights into witnesses. He didn't add, and witnesses into leverage. He didn't need to say the part the Ridge already understood. Sirens limped up the creek road from two directions. Real county trucks with real county dents. Deputies, awake because their radios had bullied their beds. They would be tired and underpaid and not in the mood to shoot a father on a ridge with helicopters filming their choices. Oren's helicopter hung overhead like a conscience with blades. Badge numbers. Oren called. If I can't run you from here, don't come up the saddle. This is so theatrical, the leader said, amused again because men like him believe theater is what poor people do to feel seen. We're going to pretend there are rules up here? I don't pretend, Silas said. I parent. You parent by stealing? I parent by choosing the hard thing in the dark, he said, and wondered if the line would sound ridiculous to him later. It didn't now. Deputies crested the lower trail cautiously, palms showing, body cams winking. A woman with hair in a bun and the kind of face that had learned to peddle empathy to drunks lifted a hand toward Silas without pointing a weapon at him. Sir, she called, voice carrying the paperwork of dignity. We see your daughter. We see you. We're going to stand right here and be witnesses while grown-ups argue about helicopters. Thank you, Silas said, meaning it in places he didn't know how to name. The leader took half a step toward the north line as if to enter a game at halftime. Two of his men adjusted, mirroring, predatory. Oren's helicopter dropped 5 feet like a warning growl. The corporate bird reappeared over the far shoulder, its belly lights lying in professionally designed fonts. The drone lowered, excited to be in a climax. Nadia dug into her jacket with a trembling hand and brought out the microSD card. She held it up, small and ugly, like a blood sample from a crime everyone still wanted to deny. This is what you kill for, she said to the leader. Her voice shook, but the words didn't. It's better than you at telling the truth. The leader's smile thinned. Truth is what men with microphones decide, he said. Then let's put it in a microphone, she answered, impressing Silas with the part of courage that blooms after the terrified part gets all the oxygen it's going to get. Don't, Silas murmured. Not here. He knew too well what the world did to people who tried to hand it receipts before it was ready to want them. We hand it to someone whose job is to lose sleep. Like him? She nodded at Oren's bird. Like him, Silas said. And half the county who just became this ridge's memory. The corporate helicopter tilted its nose the way hawks do when prey shows initiative. The drone darted, indecisive, then committed and rushed Nadia's hand like a wasp going for sugar. Silas slapped her wrist down. The card dropped into scrub. A nothing of plastic became the most important seed this ridge had ever held. Great, Oren muttered in their direction, though he couldn't have heard the card fall. Let's put treasure in confetti. Shut up, Silas whispered without humor, and went to his knees slow enough to be read as mercy by an operator humming behind a lens. He parted the scrub with a surgeon's patience and found the card clinging to a twig like a new idea. He closed his fist around it. Hands, the leader reminded happily. Silas rose with his fist closed and then did something so small the world almost missed it. He reached behind him and slipped his hand into Junie's backpack, into the Fox book, into the hollow where he'd once stashed a granola bar and now stashed a line to a different morning. He tucked the card into the book's pocket like he was packing a school lunch. Story time, he whispered to Junie. You hold brave like the fox does. She nodded, solemn. She held a backpack like a crown. Ground, we're going to do the legally complicated part, Oren announced in a bored voice that meant he was alert enough to taste his own heartbeat. Corporate bird, if you lower a line onto that saddle I will personally file a report so long it will make your grandchildren learn to read better. The corporate pilot altered posture again. Men in expensive jackets hate paperwork even more than poor men do. The helicopter eased back, then forward again, indecisive, searching for the point at which courage became overtime. Deputy, Silas said to the woman with the bun, I'm going to walk toward you very slowly with my daughter and someone who has written a software confession. You'll be very public about how bored you are with shooting fathers. She smiled in a way that wasn't a smile, that expression civil servants learn when they'd rather not be on the news for homicide before breakfast. Copy, she said. Walk like you don't want your niece to regret it. He began. Nadia matched his pace. The leader walked too, a cat moving parallel to a man carrying a bird too large to lose. The drones whined. The helicopters flared their egos. Cameras held their breath. The ridge refused to change shape. Mr. Tremaine, the leader said conversationally, do you believe in inevitability? I believe in choices, Silas said. And consequences. The order they arrive is the trick. You'll run out of mornings, the leader said. I'll spend all of mine on her, Silas said. Sons are better investments, the leader said, revealing a smallness mid-stride he hadn't meant to share. People are the only investment, Silas said, and wondered if these lines sounded grandiose from the outside. Inside, he was doing two things, keeping the man talking and keeping himself from shaking out loose fear like a dog after rain. They reached the first deputy. She kept her hands visible and her voice measured. Sir, I need you to kneel for optics, she said, apologetic. I hate it. Please forgive me. Forgiven, he said, and went to his knees carefully, placing Junie on the ground beside him with reverence. We're going to pretend this is a picnic, he told his daughter. She blinked gravely and put her palms on the dirt and made the ground a table. The deputy stepped close enough to be human. What do you want me to do with all of this? She asked under the helicopter's noise, flicking a glance toward the leader in the sky and the men in expensive indifference. Hold space, he said. Call your sergeant. Ask if he knows a man named Oren Lewis. When he says yes, tell him Oren owes him a fishing trip he'll never repay. She keyed her shoulder mic as if she were ordering lunch. Sarge? I need you to get me an Oren Lewis on air too. He's got a debt. A pause. Her harness crackled. Copy. He remembers. He's annoyed. Good sign. The leader stopped 5 yards off. Up close in morning light, he was blander than the night had let him be. The kind of face you forget and therefore trust. He had a small scar under his jaw that a wife might have kissed and imagined she understood him. He kept his hands visible too, to read more civilized than the day wanted him to be. You're making me a morning person, he said, almost sad. I resent that. You'll live, Silas said. That presumes facts not in evidence, Oren called down, cheerful. Good morning, Mercer. Mercer. Finally a name. The leader didn't look up. I don't recall you. That's the point, Oren said. Spooks like you get their retirement when nobody remembers which budget line they ate out of. Newsflash, the county accountant doesn't love you. Let's keep it tidy, the deputy said, annoyed at men whose banter put holes in procedures. She looked at Silas. Do you have evidence? In a book about a brave fox, he said. Without reaching, she smiled with her eyes. Poetic. Don't move, she said, raising her hands higher to show non-aggression to the cameras. I'm going to ask you to take the backpack off your daughter and set it between us. She doesn't love giving things to strangers, he warned. Me neither, the deputy said. We'll both try. Bug, Silas murmured. Trade the deputy your stars for a minute. Junie looked at him, looked at the deputy, looked at the sky, and then took the backpack off with ceremony. She put it on the ground like a crown. The deputy slid it to her with 2 fingers like she was moving an egg. Do you consent to me looking for a brave fox? The deputy asked. Junie nodded with the gravity of a judge. Don't hurt him, she said. I won't, the deputy said, and unzipped the pack as if it were alive. She found the book and opened the pocket. The microSD lay there, small and volcanic. She looked at it and then at Silas. He nodded once. She lifted it free and then did exactly what Silas had hoped a good civil servant would do. She held it up to the sky before putting it in an evidence pouch, making the helicopters film the chain of custody. Copy visual, Oren said over the loudspeaker. We have the handoff. County, you're on the hook for doing your job now. Working on it, came a dry new voice from the county helicopter, female, professional, not charmed by any of the men present. Corporate Bird, you're uninvited. You can hover and take notes or you can leave and file your fake flight plan someplace we don't have to smell it. The corporate helicopter hung like indecision. Mercer's eyes flicked up, then away. This is theater, he repeated, more bitter now. It's called sunlight, Nadia said, standing straighter as if a pilot light had found fuel. You should try it. He turned his head and looked at her for the first time like she was a person instead of a variable. He didn't like what he saw there, a woman whose fear had fermented into a different alcohol. You think you did something, he said quietly enough to miss the mics. I think I stopped you from doing everything, she said just as quietly. Optimist, he murmured, almost affectionate. Silas felt his own anger arrive finally, a late guest who ate half the table without apologizing. He kept his face still because any other choice would write the morning in a font he couldn't unread. He put his palm on Nadia's shoulder and left it there until his hand taught his heart how to behave. More deputies arrived, then a trooper who had coffee breath and an attitude about jurisdiction that would need therapy later. A woman in a windbreaker with letters on it that tried to mean something began taking names like she was catching moths. Oren's helicopter climbed 10 feet to be a better liar to the corporate transponder. The corporate bird, finally understanding it had lost the part of the day that mattered, peeled off, its pilot promising to file complaints in triplicate and never meaning to. This isn't the end, Mercer said, as if stating a weather pattern. No, Silas agreed. This is a morning. He wanted to be done with the man, with the ridge, with the world. He wanted to put pancakes and cartoons in the same room and call it democracy. The deputy patted the evidence pouch like it had a heartbeat. We'll need statements, she said. And a place to keep you where men like pretty fonts can't reach for a few hours. My house, Silas said immediately, then caught himself. No. Not my house. He pictured the pie on the counter the men had stood over with rifles. He pictured the laser crawling through his kitchen window like an ant colonizing his ordinary. I don't want my daughter to think the kitchen is where we get interrogated. We have a room that smells like old carpet and bad coffee, the deputy offered. Kids hate it. That's a recommendation. Junie tugged Silas's sleeve. He bent. Can we go home? She asked, voice small and full of longing's physics. Soon, he said, hating the word like a splinter. We have to go tell the truth to people who get paid to write it down first. She considered this with unsentimental practicality. Will there be pancakes after? Yes, he said, and made himself a promise that would survive wars. Nadia leaned in. I'm sorry, she whispered to Junie. For bringing night into your morning. Junie looked at her like a diplomat. We have night sometimes, she said. My dad keeps a light in his pocket. Silas swallowed a sound and turned it into breath. They walked down the ridge surrounded by a small parade of law and narrative. Oren brought his bird lower and matched their pace for 100 yards because he could and because loyalty is a form of air support. He shouted things about fishing and paperwork and barbecue he would never make but would always promise. Nadia kept touching her jacket like the card was still there, like the weight of it had changed her bones. Maybe it had. At the switchback above the gulch, Silas looked at his house. From here, it still looked like a place that believed in morning, porch quiet, windows unbroken, chimney and upright hope. Only the open front door and the black in the kitchen where a radio had once been alive told another version. He thought about the pie and wondered if there was a way to tell it sorry. At the creek crossing, a deputy in a hat too big for his head tried to joke in that way men do when they are scared and professional. You guys sure know how to make the radio interesting, he said. We try not to make it a habit, Silas said. Failing so far, Oren called from overhead. Go do your job, Silas yelled up, smiling for the first time because the part of him that had wanted to hit something had finally climbed into a helicopter and wasn't his problem. They reached the county SUVs. The deputies folded them into the mundanity of process. Junie got a blanket that smelled like all the other children who had needed blankets in this county. Nadia got a paper cup of water and a look from the deputy with the bun that said, Later, you and I will be angry about this together. Silas got the front seat like a reward and a lecture like a fine. The ride down tasted like relief salted with terror's aftertaste. He watched trees go by and made a list of things he would have to fix and then made a different list of things he would have to let break. He stuck to the second list. It was shorter and truer. Oren's bird escorted them to the turnoff and then peeled away to refuel and fight with dispatch about receipts. At the substation, a building that had a bulletin board with flyers for lost dogs and a bathroom nobody admitted needed a new fan, they were processed gently. The sergeant, who had the look of a man who had once had better ambitions but now cared fiercely about small jurisdictions done right, took custody of the card like a baptism and handed it to a tech who wore reverence like cologne. Nadia told her story, starting with how she had lied to herself about what her code was for and ending with the red dot on Silas's chest. She cried twice. Each time, she apologized for the mess, which made Silas want to find the people who had taught her to apologize for bleeding and lie them down on a ridge where helicopters could film their time thinking it over. Silas told his story, which was mostly verbs: moved, pulled, told, carried, counted. He said Junie's name carefully, and each time he did, the woman with the bun smiled with her eyebrows like a person putting a bandage on a place you didn't know was open. He said Oren's name too, and the sergeant nodded with the relief of a man who had 3 good friends left and had just been reminded of one of them. In the corner, a television with bad color tried to be a window into the county. It showed the ridgeline under a morning that had turned blue as if it felt guilty for having been theater. A news churn got half of everything wrong. A helicopter framed in the shot pretended to be one bird and was another. But the cameras had caught a man in a suit with a red dot on his chest and a father holding a mirror and a child with a backpack like a crown. It was enough. The tech pulled the video from the card while 2 people watched and 3 cameras watched them watch because chain of custody had learned to thrive in paranoia. The first seconds of the footage played on a monitor the size of a cutting board, the wildfire project that had been warped into a hunting program, test logs with the words priority, messenger flashing like lipstick on a corpse, a development screen where someone had toggled ignore civilian attire to true. Nobody in the room said anything for a long time. The sergeant breathed out what might have been a hard prayer. The bun deputy said a word that would have gotten her written up yesterday and would get her promoted tomorrow. The tech said, "Well, I guess my Saturday is different," and pulled up a second clip. Nadia watched her own keystrokes, recorded by a system designed to document triumphs and ended up documenting crimes. "I thought if I just showed the right person," she said, voice small again now that adrenaline had vacated the room. "But the right person keeps moving, doesn't he?" "He stays in rooms like this," the sergeant said. He's boring and tired and married to this county and allergic to fonts on jackets. He looked at Silas. You did the stupid right thing. I try to ration those, Silas said. He turned to Junie, who had been coloring a flyer about a fundraiser for the volunteer fire hall like it was a project she'd been assigned. Pancakes? Pancakes, she said, businesslike. They were released to a seat in the break room while 3 different agencies performed 3 different dances in the room they'd left. Orrin walked in 30 minutes later with wind hair and oil on his jeans and a grin that said he had burned bridges before breakfast and intended to burn more before lunch. He hugged Silas with a rib-cracking sincerity that made the room look away politely. He crouched to Junie and presented a sticker from a pilot's helmet like it was a medal. Uncle Orrin, Junie announced to the room, claiming him with the blunt power of children. In all the ways that will get me investigated, yes, Orrin said gravely, and slid into a chair. You okay? Ask me in a month, Silas said. I'll ask you in an hour, Orrin replied. He jerked his chin toward the conference room. They've got Mercer in a box at the regional. The company has 7 lawyers on the phone and a PR statement typed by something with artificial in its name. The footage is ugly in the good way. They'll spend a week trying to talk about context and then a year getting regulated by people who needed an excuse to regulate them anyway. And then? Nadia asked, and the way she asked it was the sound of someone who had watched monsters walk through regulations like puddles. And then you'll testify 3 times, and you'll have to change where you get your coffee, and people who don't like mirrors will call you a traitor on television, Orrin said. And then in 2 years some other company will try a cleaner version and I'll hope we get lucky on a ridge again. He looked not sorry enough for a cynic and not hopeful enough for a kid. He looked exactly like a man who had decided to be a professional pessimist so other people could have the luxury of hope. Nadia stared at the table. I'm tired, she said. I haven't done anything and I'm tired. You did the thing, Orrin said. You carried the truth through a night full of men who wanted it to die. You're allowed to be tired. Silas reached across and put his hand over hers. He didn't say anything. He didn't know how to hold the weight of a woman's exhaustion with words. He held it with the palm that had held flares and rope in his daughter's backpack. A deputy brought pancakes from a diner brave enough to deliver to a building that smelled like paperwork, and the pancakes were the kind that solved 30% of problems for an hour. Junie ate 3 like a creature with faith. Silas ate 1.5 like a man making room for later sorrow and later joy. Nadia ate half of one and cried into the syrup like it had kept secrets for women before. You going home? Orrin asked when the plates were just plates. Eventually, Silas said, and thought about the porch light he had left unrepaired. I need a new radio. And a new lock. And a new story for bed. You want a patrol car to sit on your road tonight? The Bun deputy asked, appearing at his shoulder like competence. We do that when the county needs to feel bigger than it is. Yes, Silas said, without pretending to be proud. And for the next 2. I'll pay in pancakes. Taxpayers already did, she said. But I won't say no to pancakes. She looked at Nadia. We can get you a safe place for a week. Real safe places are fairy tales, but we have places that are safe enough in the ways that matter. I don't want to run, Nadia said, surprising herself as much as anyone. I've been running since I copied that data. I want to stand someplace and make it true that I stood. Then stand here until you're bored, the deputy said. Then stand in court. Then stand in front of a camera you don't owe anything to and talk about foxes. Nadia laughed a broken laugh. Okay, she said. Okay. The day bled into afternoon. The county did what counties do on days when they become national for a minute. It made coffee over and over, it called the state, it took out extra trash, it forgot lunch, it remembered it had a heart. Mercer's name went up on a whiteboard with other names that had once been contractors and would now be cautionary tales. The company's statement hit the wires and read exactly like statements do. Mistakes were made, safety is our top priority, we respect our partners in government, we will cooperate fully. Orrin read it out loud and invented better lies for them, funnier ones, and the room exhaled for 30 seconds. By dusk, they let Silas drive home behind a convoy. The road to the ridge looked like it always had, which felt rude and also kind. The tower kept standing, thin and rickety and proud of itself. The house sat where it belonged, pretending it had been asleep all along. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and cedar under the smoke and the adrenaline the human nose imagines. They went inside together, Silas, Nadia, Junie, and the deputy who had adopted their morning on purpose. They turned on lights. The difference between night and morning isn't always time, sometimes it's electricity. The pie on the counter mourned itself. Silas held a small funeral with a fork and decided the frosting had nothing to apologize for. Junie put fresh stars on the ceiling with stickers she'd found in a drawer he had thought was out of stars. Nadia stood at the sink and watched the window's dark shape shift into the reflection of a woman who had lived a different day than she had planned. The deputy checked the doors and the locks like a friend who knows how to ghost. She wrote her number on a sticky note and stuck it to the fridge like a banner. "I'm on until 6, she said. "Then I go home and pretend to sleep. Call anyway." "Thank you," Silas said. "For what?" "For being bored about gunfights," he said. "And excited about evidence." She grinned. "My brand." She nodded at Junie. "Tomorrow, if the world allows, bring her by the station. We'll show her how radios work when they're not getting murdered." "We will," he said. After she left, the house felt bigger and also filled more exactly. Nadia dried her hands on a dish towel and looked at the man who had put his body between a dot and her heart 3 times in 12 hours. "I don't know how to say thank you in a way that doesn't make it less," she whispered. "You say it by sleeping," he said. "By letting your brain turn all this into something it can file without you having to burn for it every minute." "I don't know if I can," she said. "I'm going to show you how," he replied. He pointed at the couch. "That is a bed now. That blanket is a mountain. These walls know how to listen. If you wake up, the stars will be here. They have tenure." She laughed and cried at the same time, the sound small and honest. She lay down where he pointed, pulled the blanket to her chin, and watched him move around the room making small corrections to the day, closing a curtain, picking up a fork, setting a chair back on 4 legs. He watched her until the pattern of her breath changed and stayed changed. Then he went to his daughter's room. Junie lay under the new stars like a cartographer. He sat on the edge of the bed and stroked her hair back and told her a story about a fox who learned that brave was just the word people used when they decided to be exactly themselves on purpose. Halfway through, she slept like a right decision. He stayed longer than he needed to because this was the only part of the day that didn't feel like borrowing. He went back to the living room and lowered himself to the floor where he could see Nadia and the door at the same time. He didn't take the earplugs out of his pocket because superstitions deserve respect. He leaned against the couch and let his head drop back. Outside, the ridge breathed like a big animal returning to itself between storms. Somewhere far off, a helicopter crossed the county with somebody else's emergency under its rotors. His phone buzzed. "Oren, we made a mess. The good kind. Sleep. I'll sit on the desk of anyone who tries to file something stupid after midnight." Silas typed, "You're too heavy for desks." Oren, "True. I'll sit on their conscience." Silas, "Good luck finding it." Oren sent a laughing emoji, then, "Proud of you. Don't get used to me saying it." Silas smiled into the dark. "Noted," he typed, and put the phone face down. He didn't sleep yet. He listened to his house catalog itself. He listened to the ridge telling old stories to itself in wind and owl and the tiny metallic contractions of a stove forgetting it had been hot. He let his body shake for a minute, grateful nobody was watching, and then he breathed that out too. When sleep finally took him, it did what sleep does for people who have earned it by walking through night with other people's lives in their hands. It built a small room inside his head where the worst thing could not enter. He slept there until the hour when children wake because morning refuses not to exist. Junie sat up and blinked at the stars she had made and declared them sufficient. She padded into the living room and knelt by her father and placed her small palm on his cheek. He woke as if he had never not been ready. Pancakes, she said. Pancakes, he agreed. He made them with too much vanilla. Nadia woke to the smell and to the sound of dishes living their best lives. She sat up slowly like a person returning from the ocean. When she joined them at the table, Junie pushed the syrup toward her with the imperious generosity of children who have decided somebody is family for as long as it takes to digest sugar. They ate. The morning sat with them like a third guest who had finally figured out how to be polite. Outside, the ridge kept its promises by looking exactly like itself. The day ahead would be appointments and statements and phone calls from numbers Silas would hand to voicemail. It would be messages from strangers calling him a hero or an idiot, sometimes in the same sentence. It would be hardware store runs and new locks and a moment on the porch where he would fix the light and decide not to turn it on yet. It would be texts from Oren full of nonsense and usefulness. It would be a deputy stopping by to drink bad coffee and check the windows and show Junie how a radio says hello. It would be, in other words, a life, the only miracle he had ever demanded from the universe with any consistency. At noon, when the news trucks finally discovered a driveway worth ruining, he took Junie by the hand and walked out to the porch. He told the reporters thank you for caring and no for the rest. He told them a story about pancakes. He told them to spell Nadia's name correctly. He told them not to film the stars on the ceiling. They listened like men don't and women do, and then the county reminded them with quiet authority that driveways weren't press rooms. When it was quiet again, Nadia stood beside him and watched the gulch decide to be harmless. You saved my life, she said, like a woman finishing a sentence she'd been struggling with because it didn't want to be over. You saved a lot more than that, he said. You told the truth where it was dangerous. I don't feel brave, she admitted. Good, he said. Feeling brave is a side effect. Doing brave is the medicine. She nodded, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in the universal sign for a person trying to put their face back on after tears, and smiled the smallest smile in the house. I'll stay in town, she said. Find a place where the internet is mediocre and the people are kind. This county specializes, he said. We have discount mediocrity and surplus kindness. Then I'm home, she said, and startled herself by meaning it just enough. He looked at the ridge and at the sky and at the porch that had learned to be a checkpoint and decided he could accept a day that had learned to be two things at once. Oren texted a photo, the shot of Mercer with the red dot on his chest from a camera angle that made the man look smaller than he wanted to be forever. Under it, Oren had written, sunlight. Silas replied with a photo of pancakes and stars. Witnesses, he typed. In the evening, when the ridge drew its shadow up over itself like a quilt, Silas went to the porch and sat with his boots on the step and watched his daughter draw with chalk. Nadia sat in the doorway with a mug and a book with a fox on the cover. The deputy drove by and didn't stop because her stopping would have made the evening about the past. The men with fonts on jackets were on television lying to each other with lawsuits. The county was busy pretending to be small so it could survive being large for one more day. Silas looked at the place where the red dot had once rested and put his palm there, an old superstition acknowledging a new scar. He thought about all the censors and all the places writing their opinions in light. He thought about mirrors. He thought about algorithms that could be taught to apologize and men who couldn't. He thought, finally, about mourning, and the stubborn truth that if you keep walking toward it with people you'd die for, sometimes it arrives on time. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.